Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you get in your car to drive to work, and you stop for gas. But instead of the usual price, the digital sign is flashing numbers you have never seen before. $7 a gallon? Maybe 8. You check your phone and the stock market is in free fall. Inflation is skyrocketing. Panic is setting in. You wonder, did a nuclear bomb go off? Did World War III start? No. All of this chaos, the collapse of your economy, the emptying of your wallet, started because of one small, unmanned boat, no bigger than a jet ski, floating silently in the dark waters of the Black Sea. This is not a movie script. This is not science fiction. This is the reality that is unfolding right now, at this very second. While the world is distracted by headlines about politics and elections, a fuse has been lit in Eastern Europe that is about to blow up the global energy market. And the scary part? It involves an American company, billions of dollars, and a strategy that could bring Russia to its knees or destroy the global economy. Welcome to the most dangerous phase of the Ukraine war. Hello friends and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about a shift in modern warfare that has largely gone unnoticed by the mainstream media until now. For the last 3 years, we have looked at maps of Ukraine. We have looked at trenches in the Donbas region. We have counted tanks and artillery shells. We have analyzed how many F-16s are being sent. But while everyone was looking at the land, the real war has moved to the water. And this shift is going to impact every single person living in the United States, Europe, and Asia. We are talking about energy. We are talking about oil. To understand the gravity of the situation, we need to zoom in to a place called Novorossiysk. You might not have heard of this city, but it is one of the most critical locations on the planet right now. Novorossiysk is a major port city in Russia, located on the Black Sea coast. Historically, it has been a naval base, a fortress for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. But more importantly, it is an economic artery. It is a massive export hub where giant oil tankers dock, fill up with crude oil, and sail out to the Mediterranean to power the world. For a long time, Ukraine avoided striking deep into these energy hubs because of the geopolitical consequences. But that restraint is gone. Recently, Ukrainian forces launched a swarm of naval drones into this harbor. These are not your typical military ships. These are small, remote-controlled surface vessels packed with explosives. They are hard to detect on radar, they are fast, and they are cheap. But here is where the story gets twisted. In this recent attack, they didn't just target a Russian warship. They targeted a specific piece of infrastructure known as a loading buoy. Now, a loading buoy sounds boring. It sounds like a piece of plastic floating in the water. But in the oil industry, a single-point mooring buoy is a massive offshore structure that allows supertankers to load oil without coming into the port. It is the tap for the pipeline. The buoy that Ukraine hit belongs to something called the CPC, or the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. This is where the geopolitics gets incredibly messy. You see, the CPC pipeline does not transport Russian oil, technically. It transports oil from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a landlocked country. It has massive oil fields, specifically the Tengiz field, which is a superfield. But because Kazakhstan has no ocean, it has to move that oil through a pipeline to get it to the market. That pipeline runs across Russian territory and ends at the Russian port of Novorossiysk. Here is the kicker. This pipeline and the oil it carries are not owned by the Russian government. The biggest stakeholder in this project is Chevron. Yes, the American energy giant Chevron. This was the first major deal made after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Western companies went into Kazakhstan to help extract oil. So, when Ukraine attacks this infrastructure, they are technically attacking a pipeline that makes money for an American company. So why would they do that? Why would Ukraine risk angering its biggest supporter, the United States? The answer lies in how Russia plays the game. Even though the pipeline is meant for Kazakh oil, it runs through Russia. And Russia, controlling the territory, often injects its own crude oil into the system. They blend it, they use the pipeline's capacity for themselves, crowding out the Kazakh oil. To the Ukrainians, this makes the entire infrastructure a valid military target. If it moves through Russia, if it pays transit fees to Moscow, it is fair game. This specific attack on the CPC buoy puts roughly 1.4 million barrels of oil per day at risk. That is a massive amount of energy. To put that in perspective, that is more than some entire nations consume. But that is just the beginning. There is another 1 million barrels of purely Russian oil that also flows out of Novorossiysk. So we are looking at nearly 2.5 million barrels of oil per day that is now in the crosshairs of Ukrainian naval drones. But Ukraine didn't stop at the port. They have expanded their hunting ground to the entire Black Sea. They recently targeted 2 oil tankers that were part of what we call the Shadow Fleet. Now, let's take a deep dive into what the Shadow Fleet actually is, because this sounds like something out of a spy novel. When the West placed sanctions on Russian oil, they said Russia could not sell oil above a certain price. They also banned Western insurance companies from insuring ships carrying Russian oil. Now, maritime insurance is crucial. You cannot legally dock a ship in most ports without insurance, because if there is a spill, someone has to pay the billions of dollars for cleanup. Russia's solution was to create a ghost fleet, or shadow fleet. They went around the world and bought up hundreds of old, rusting tankers that were destined for the scrapyard. They bought them through shell companies in Dubai, Hong Kong, and India. These ships have no proper insurance. They turn off their transponders so they can't be tracked, they paint over their names, they operate in the shadows, moving Russian oil to customers like China and India who are willing to look the other way. But Ukraine has now started hunting these ghost ships. In the recent attack, they struck 2 of them. Luckily for the world, these ships were empty at the time. They were returning from delivery runs. If they had been full and they were hid in the Black Sea, we could have seen an environmental catastrophe that would have destroyed the ecosystem of the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Imagine millions of gallons of crude oil washing up on the shores of Turkey. But the message from Kyiv is clear. The Black Sea is now a no-go zone. It is closed for business. If you are a captain of a Shadow Fleet tanker, are you going to risk sailing into waters where explosive drones are waiting for you? Probably not. The insurance premiums for these ships, if they can even get insurance, will skyrocket. The crew will refuse to sail. Effectively, Ukraine is setting up a naval blockade without having a massive navy. They are doing it with technology and fear. According to geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan, if the Black Sea route is shut down, Russia loses the ability to export millions of barrels a day. But the nightmare scenario for Russia, and perhaps for the global economy, is what happens next. Russia has 3 main outlets for its oil. One is the Black Sea, which we just discussed. The second is the Pacific Ocean, out of Vladivostok, which supplies Asia. The third, and most vulnerable, is the Baltic Sea. Let's look at the map of the Baltic Sea. It is located in the north, near St. Petersburg. This is Russia's window to Europe. A massive amount of oil leaves from the port of Primorsk and Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg. But here is the problem for Vladimir Putin. To get out of the Baltic Sea, a Russian ship has to navigate a very narrow path. It has to sail past Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden, Poland, Germany, and finally through the narrow straits of Denmark. Every single country I just named is a member of NATO. The Baltic Sea has effectively become a NATO lake. Now, Ukraine doesn't have a navy in the Baltic, but they have long-range drones. And there is a growing suspicion that some European countries who are tired of the war and want to see Russia financially crippled might just turn a blind eye or even help Ukraine with intelligence. If Ukraine manages to strike tankers in the Baltic, or if they mine the exit points, Russia is in big trouble. If the Black Sea is closed and the Baltic Sea becomes too dangerous, Russia loses access to markets for about 2/3 to 3/4 of its oil exports. We are talking about removing 3, 4, or maybe even 5 million barrels of oil from the daily global supply. This brings us to the economic impact, and this is where you need to pay attention. Right now, the world is swimming in oil. Production in the United States is at record highs. Demand in China is a bit soft because their economy is slowing down. So, if Russia loses 1 million barrels today, the market can absorb it. You might see a small bump in gas prices, maybe 10 cents, but nothing catastrophic. However, if we lose the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea at the same time, the math changes completely. The global energy system does not have the spare capacity to replace 4 or 5 million barrels of oil overnight. It just doesn't exist. Saudi Arabia has some spare capacity, but not enough to cover a total Russian collapse. If this happens, we are looking at an oil shock similar to the 1970s, but in the modern world, everything moves faster. Oil prices could jump to $150 or $200 a barrel. In the United States, that means gas prices could double. When energy prices double, everything else gets more expensive. Food relies on trucks, and trucks need diesel. Plastics, medicine, construction materials, everything is tied to the price of oil. We would see a resurgence of inflation that would make the last 2 years look like a walk in the park. Central banks would have to raise interest rates again, mortgages would go up, businesses would close. It would be a global recession. This is the gamble that Ukraine is taking. They know that the West, particularly the United States, is terrified of high gas prices. In an election year, or even a post-election year, the number one thing that makes voters unhappy is the price at the pump. By targeting this infrastructure, Ukraine is forcing the world to make a choice. They are saying, you want this war to end? Then let us finish it. Let us bankrupt the Russian state. Russia is a petrostate. It is essentially a gas station with nuclear weapons. If you cut off the revenue from oil, the Russian economy collapses. They cannot pay their soldiers, they cannot build more missiles.
The war ends, but the cost of that collapse is paid by you, the consumer, at the gas pump. This strategy is bold, and it is desperate. Ukraine realizes that fighting a war of attrition on the ground is costing too many lives. They cannot match Russia man for man, so they are attacking the wallet. They are attacking the bank account. The attack on the Chevron-connected CPC pipeline proves that Ukraine is willing to accept friendly fire. They are willing to hurt American corporate interests if it means hurting Russia more. It is a signal to Washington and Brussels that there are no red lines anymore. As we look toward 2026, Peter Zeihan predicts that this is going to be the year of the energy war. The physics of the market are undeniable. If the ships cannot sail, the oil does not flow. If the oil does not flow, the price goes up. So what should the United States do? This is the question for the policymakers. Do they rein in Ukraine and tell them to stop attacking energy infrastructure to keep gas prices low? Or do they let Ukraine take the gloves off, risking a global economic crisis in hopes that it will finally break the Kremlin's power? It is a game of chicken between Kyiv, Moscow, and Washington. And right now, the drones are flying, the tankers are turning back, and the waters of the Black Sea are becoming a graveyard for the Russian economy. Keep an eye on your local gas station. Keep an eye on the news coming out of the Baltic Sea.